Mr. Sean,
Kellen.
I need to ask you a question, bro. I am reading in 1 Samuel at the moment, and I'm in chapter 28, and as you would know, at this point, like Saul's not hearing anything from God. He's trying like everything he can, and then he ends up consulting a witch. And I'm going to need you to explain this. So in verse 11, it says, "Then the woman said, 'Whom shall I bring up for you?' He said, 'Bring up Samuel for me.' When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. And the woman said to Saul, 'Why have you deceived me? You are Saul.'" Sean, what did I just read?
What did you just read? Oh my goodness, what is this? No, I'm just teasing. This is a strange, bizarre story that happens, and then you don't see anything similar to this again. So if we just take it for what it is, Saul has lost his bearings. He once heard from God. God spoke to him. God anointed him. He's king. And then he starts to disobey God more and more. And as he does, God withdraws from him. And actually to the point where God says, I'm done with you. As king of this land, you're no longer going to be king. And by this point now, he's so desperate, he's grabbing at anything. So he desperately needs Samuel, who was his mentor, his guide, in a sense, his voice from God. And Samuel's dead, which is, when someone dies, it's hard to get hold of them again. And so now he's desperately trying to get hold of Samuel. And he ends up losing the plot to the point that he goes to this witch. Yeah. I think one of the key things to understand, because you can look at this and say, well, here this woman brings up someone's spirit who once lived. Is this possible? And can anyone do this? Because we know in many cultures people do worship ancestors and try and interact with them. Here's what I think was actually going on. When I was younger, there was a show that was on primetime TV, sort of just after supper time. It was called Crossing Over with John Edward. And this man, he had a studio audience, and they would sit, and essentially the entire show was him coming out, and apparently he didn't know any of them, that's what they said, and he would look at them and choose people out of the audience and say, you had a relative who died in this way, this is what they're saying to you now. Jeep. And people would begin to cry, they would be overjoyed, you know, obviously they're hearing a message from another realm. And it seemed either he was completely lying about it, or he knew about them without them knowing about it, or he was actually hearing something. And I began to ask myself, what is going on here? I think my conclusion is actually that this man was listening to a demon. A demon was telling him things. Sheesh. And he had an inner knowledge about them and about loved ones who'd passed away. I believe the demonic realm is powerful. It's not as powerful as God, but it is powerful, and the demonic realm does know things about people. I think that's what's happening here. Now, this woman, now what I'm interested in is in verse 12, when she brings Samuel up, this witch is shocked. Now, why would she be shocked? Because Saul asked her to do it. She shouldn't be surprised at that at all. She should say, well, there you go. Yeah. But suddenly she realized it's actually Samuel's spirit. In other words, she was used to a demon actually helping her. A demon pretending to be people. It's obviously how she made her money. A demon would pretend to be people, and it would deceive people, and then they would pay her money to hear a message from beyond. Now, the actual spirit of Samuel comes up. God has hijacked this moment. So here's what I get out of this, because the scripture is given to us to understand God. What I get out of this is God is greater than the demonic. He can hijack anything he wants to. Yeah. And even in this moment, God takes what this woman was doing, which was such an abomination before God, and he hijacks it and uses it for his own purposes. So the real Samuel comes up and speaks to Saul, and God does actually give him a message. It's not a good one, but God gives him a message. And then what I also understand from it is that there's a line being drawn between life and death that we must not cross. Yeah. We must not try to cross it. I see in instances like this that God can in a way change the thing. He can step in and use it for his own purposes, but we should never ever try to consult the dead. It's beyond our scope of the things God has allowed us to do in this life. And I would say to anybody who does play games with those type of things, or even engage in those things at a cultural level, you are talking to demons. You are consulting the demonic, and they know things about your relatives, and that's how you're hearing these things. So I would say, in a very bizarre and quite unsettling story, we should see God is fully in control, And we should also take great concern over what can happen when we lose our bearings, to the point that we actually, rather than going to God, we're actually trying to change the system and go through other ways.
That makes a lot more sense. Appreciate you explaining.
Come on. Yes.